What's up, Tailgaters? My name is Tailgate Nate. Welcome back to my channel. And today I'm going to be giving you my 2020 SEC Preseason Power Rankings. So in my conference power ranking video, where I rank the 10 conferences in college football, I rank the SEC the #1 overall conference. So we're going to go ahead and start with the SEC for the team power rankings. The SEC has a lot of good teams this year, including, of course, Alabama, Georgia, and defending national champion LSU. All teams that are probably going to be in the top 10, plus some more top 10 quality teams. The SEC is going to be so competitive, and it's hands down going to be the best conference in all of college football. Before we dive on into the power rankings, I have listed out stats for all the teams in the SEC and their respective rank in the conference. You'll also see their recruiting class ranking among other SEC teams. And there's going to be offensive and defensive. So offensive is going to be points per game, yards per game, rushing yards per game, passing yards per game. And then I'm also going to give you their offensive returning production. That'll be a percentage number. Then on the defense, I'm just going to be giving you the flip-flop. So the stats on offense, what they would be in defense. So opponent points per game, opponent yards per game, opponent rushing yards per game, opponent passing yards per game, and then their overall defensive returning production. So without further ado, let's go ahead. Let's get on into the power rankings. All right, so at number 14, I have the Vanderbilt Commodores. See there, they are bringing in the worst recruiting class in the SEC, ranked dead last at 14th. And they didn't have a good overall team last year either. When you look, only 16.5 points per game. That is dead last in the SEC. Under 300 yards per game, that's also dead last in the SEC. And what doesn't help is they're not even returning a quarterback. All their quarterbacks either left because of seniority or they went into the transfer portal. They're going to have to rely on more than likely a true freshman quarterback. And it doesn't help that they're also losing an experienced running back who was a pretty good running back, good underrated running back, but he's gone now. Their defense also wasn't great last year, but they are returning 93% of their defensive production. But if you're going to be returning 93% of the same thing, it doesn't bode well for the Commodores. And also, the defense is going to need to step up. You're going to have a lot of guys with experience, but the uncertainty and just the expectation, if Vanderbilt is going to return more of the same on defense, this is why they're at number 14. At number 13, I have the Arkansas Razorbacks, the 11th ranked recruiting class in the SEC. And they're bringing in transfer quarterback from Florida, Felipe Franks. Averaged only about 21.5 points per game, under 350 yards per game, both down at the bottom towards the SEC. Their defense was in the bottom of the SEC as well. See that they're returning around 65% on both offense and defense. So it's really going to come down to everyone just needs to take it a step up. Every player for Arkansas just needs to play at a different level if Arkansas is going to be better. I think Felipe Franks helps Arkansas out a little bit. It gives them a good boost. Now Arkansas's quarterback wasn't bad, but Felipe Franks is a much better quarterback. He has a lot more experience. Played under Dan Mullen for about a year. So Felipe Franks is definitely going to take this Arkansas team up a notch. And I believe that Arkansas has the talent in order to get to a bowl game. But the fact that they're bringing in a not so great recruiting class and just the overall talent that surrounds Felipe Franks, since it's not all that great, this is why Arkansas is number 13. All right, at number 12, I have the Missouri Tigers. So they are bringing in the second worst recruiting class in all the SEC. Their offense wasn't great either, and you see they're only bringing back 43% of that, so maybe a fresh start. And when you look, their defense was actually pretty good. This is why Missouri went 6-6 last year. Allowed under 20 points per game, allowed just over 300 rushing yards per game, or 300 total yards per game, which is actually third in the SEC, and I was surprised to find that out, but they are only returning 64% of that, which ranks 10th in the SEC. So Missouri's defense is going to have to play like they did last year. Of course, I believe his name is Sean Robinson. they're going to rely on the transfer quarterback to come in and do some damage. But again, there's a lot of uncertainty for Missouri, so this is why they're at number 12. All right, at number 11 are the South Carolina Gamecocks. So they had a fairly decent recruiting class. You see they're ranked 8th in the SEC, but they weren't all that great last year, and they had a really difficult schedule, only around 22.5 points per game. But they are returning 72% of their offense, which is really good. Of course, redshirt freshman last year, Ryan Helinski came in, and he's probably going to take it up a notch this year. He's really going to step up, play harder, because South Carolina has some good potential, and with this recruiting class, bringing in some pretty okay talent to surround Ryan Helinski with. Their defense wasn't the best last year, but they're returning 72%, again, just like the offense. So it's going to be an experienced team for South Carolina. They're returning a lot more than a lot of other SEC teams. South Carolina definitely has the talent they need to get to a bowl game, but what worries me about South Carolina is the wide receivers got to step up. Ryan Helinski's got to be able to get people down the field, which is something South Carolina struggled with last year. So this is why the Gamecocks are at number 11. All right, at number 10, I have the Ole Miss Rebels. So the 3rd worst or 12th ranked recruiting class in the SEC. Their offense last year was fairly good. 26.5 points per game. They just struggled to score the ball. But when you look at their yards per game, they were 3rd in the SEC with 445 yards per game and 2nd in rushing with just over 250 yards per game, which is absolutely insane. So they're returning their quarterback, John Rice Plumlee, along with offensive weapon at the wide receiver, Elijah Moore. They have some good young talent, but their recruiting class isn't going to help them out a lot. Their defense was also one of the bottom in the SEC, returning 64% of that production. And most notably, they're bringing in Lane Kiffin at head coach. Now, it's probably going to be hard for the Rebels to overcome a lot of this, not a lot of practice thing, but Ole Miss could be a sneaky good team in the SEC. I'd watch out for the Rebels, but for right now, they're at number 10. Number 9 is the Mississippi State Bulldogs, 10th ranked recruiting class in the SEC. And they were a fairly average team last year. Their offense was pretty good, 3rd in the SEC in rushing yards per game, 220, only around 27 points per game. Again, like Ole Miss, just kind of struggled to score the football a little bit, but it was their defense that lost them so many games last year. They allowed around 29 points per game, which, again, amongst average teams, it's not that great, and they allowed almost 400 yards per game. That's not great either, but they are returning 48% of that, which is also not great. Kind of gives them an opportunity to get a fresh start, though, but you lose a lot of experience on that defense. The big thing why Mississippi State is number 9, actually there are 2 big things. One, Mike Leach is coming in as the head coach, came over from Washington State, and 2, they got KJ Costello, transfer quarterback from Stanford. I think when you combine Mike Leach, who was an old Pac-12 head coach, and KJ Costello, who was an old Pac-12 quarterback, they're going to be able to get along really well, and they're going to have similar visions for this Bulldogs team. But their defense is why I got to put the Bulldogs at number 9. All right, number 8 is the Kentucky Wildcats. So Kentucky, again, was a very sneaky good team this year. They're returning a lot. They're returning their quarterback, Terry Wilson. They're also returning their running back, Smoke. And if you look, big thing, they were 1st in the SEC in rushing yards per game last year, and they're returning their 2 biggest threats in their running game, which is Smoke and Terry Wilson. Now, if Kentucky is going to be a sneaky good team in the SEC, which they do definitely have the potential to do, they need to get their passing game going, and that starts with Terry Wilson. Now, Terry Wilson is definitely a dual threat quarterback when he has to be, but runs the ball more than he probably should. By that, he doesn't really take long shots down the field because he doesn't have a wide receiver that he trusts to go up and make those one-on-one catches. So Kentucky is going to need a wide receiver to step up, and their defense was fairly decent last year. They just got to improve in stopping the run game, but they're returning 78% of that. So Kentucky could be a fairly sneaky good team, but it's their passing game that worries me a lot for Kentucky, and that's why they're at number 8. All right, and number 7 is the Tennessee Volunteers. So Tennessee is another yet interesting team, 7th in recruiting for the SEC. Points per game, around 25 points per game. Tennessee, if you scratch their first 2 games, they were a very, very good team. They went 7-3, but when you look at who they played, they didn't really play all the toughest. They didn't really play the toughest competition. So Tennessee, yes, you could say they do. They have a lot of momentum going into the 2020 season. Jarrett Guarantano is going to be back there at quarterback, but he needs guys to step up around him. The defense also got to step up. Pretty average numbers last year. The Tennessee defense definitely has the potential to step it up, returning 69% of that and returning 68% of their offense. Tennessee could also be a sneaky good team, but it's just all the uncertainties surrounding the Volunteers is why I put them at number 7. Number 6, I have the Texas A&M Aggies. So Texas A&M was also a fairly average team last year. They ranked 4th in the SEC in recruiting, around 30 points per game last year. Again, Texas A&M was really competitive. They're going to be returning quarterback Kellen Mond. A lot of weapons are going to be returning around him, which is why they are returning 80% of their offense. 80% of their offense is big because you get Kellen Mond, lots of weapons around there. Offensive line might be a little bit of a question for the Aggies. And overall, their defense wasn't that bad either. Again, pretty average numbers, but they're returning 74% of it. Texas A&M's definitely going to take a step up from where they were last year. And the reason I have them at number 6 is, again, yes, I know I just said they're returning 80% of their offense, but they need guys to play at a whole new level. Kellen Mond is already going to be a sneaky good quarterback. I can just feel it. But guys need to step up around Kellen Mond. This is why Texas A&M is at number 6. Number 5, I have the Auburn Tigers. So Auburn, again, a fairly competitive team in the SEC last year, like they always are. Great scoring team, a really solid defense. They're only returning about 60% of their defense, though, and a big part of that is because they are losing Derek Brown. They're returning 61% of their offense, and that includes quarterback Bo Nix, wide receiver Seth Williams, and it does depend on whether or not Jatarvius Whitlow decides to stay an Auburn Tiger or to transfer out. Currently, I believe, still in the transfer portal, but hasn't really gone anywhere, made any significant moves, so he's still an Auburn Tiger. Auburn's bringing in a pretty good recruiting class as well, 5th in the SEC. Their defense is going to have to step it up with Derek Brown being gone, but Auburn, with Bo Nix and Seth Williams out there, the quarterback wide receiver duo, very young quarterback wide receiver duo. They're going to do some incredible things next year. Auburn's got a pretty tough schedule, though, and this is why the Tigers are number 5. All right, at number 4, I have the defending national champion LSU Tigers. So they are 3rd in recruiting among SEC teams. And you look at their offense last year, of course, we all know their offense was explosive with Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 1st in points per game, 1st in yards per game, 1st in passing yards per game. Their rushing attack wasn't the best, but you don't really need a rushing attack like that when Joe Burrow was slinging 400-yard games through the air every single week. But as I mentioned, they're losing those 3 guys. Joe Burrow, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Justin Jefferson, they all went to the draft. Only 30% of their offense is going to be returning for LSU. Their defense was pretty solid as well, but it was really the offense that got it done for them last year. The defense is definitely going to have to take a step up. They still have Derek Stingley, but among that, only 54%, including Derek Stingley, returning on that defense. It's the 2nd worst in the SEC, so not a lot returning for LSU. I believe they were something like 127th in overall returning production nationally. So if LSU wants to win another national title this year, Miles Brennan and Jamar Chase and Derek Stingley are going to have to step it up. They're going to have to play at a level that their game is not at currently. Yes, they are all still extremely good, but they all have to step it up if LSU is going to get back to a national title. And it's the returning production, and just look at those percentages. It's the low percentages on returning production, which is why I have LSU at number 4. At number 3, I have the Florida Gators. So Florida, as I said so many times, was a team last year that I did not give enough credit, and I'm definitely going to give them lots of credit this year. 6th in the SEC in recruiting, so a pretty okay recruiting class. You're going to get Kyle Trask back there at quarterback. Their defense, among the best in the SEC, returning 67% of that defense. So about 2/3 of defense coming back, which is really good. Florida's probably going to have one of the better offensive lines in the SEC and one of the better defensive lines in the SEC as well. Just look at those numbers. Only 15.5 points per game, only around 305 yards per game, and only around 103 yards per game. If Florida's defense can play like they did last year, you better watch out. Their rushing game just needs to get it going. When you look there, 130 yards per game last year. That's second worst among SEC teams. So Florida's rushing game needs to step it up. But Florida's schedule eases up a lot this year. And with Dan Mullen, Kyle Trask, and what Florida did last year, that's why I have the Gators at number 3. All right, at number 2, I have the Georgia Bulldogs. So they are first in recruiting for the 2020 season nationally, which makes them first in the SEC. You look there, they were a really good team last year. Their offense could play better. They are only returning 50%. Big part of that because Jake Fromm is gone and DeAndre Swift is gone. But they are bringing in transfer quarterback Jamie Newman from Wake Forest. It's going to be interesting to see how he fits in there with the whole Kirby Smart system. Georgia's also going to need to find another running back to replace DeAndre Swift. But you look, they're consistently 5th in the SEC amongst the major categories, and their defense was the best in the SEC last year, only allowing 12.5 points per game, only allowing 275 yards per game, not even allowing 100 yards on the ground last year, and they're returning 80% of that defense, and that's second in the SEC behind Vanderbilt. And with the recruiting class Georgia's bringing in, Georgia really is a top contender in the SEC this year, like for real. I know we've all been talking about how Georgia can give Alabama a good fighter. This is Georgia's year. This really, if Georgia is going to be able to compete for national title, this is the year for the Bulldogs. But the reason they're at number 2 is because who else but Alabama at number 1? The Crimson Tide are at number 1, second recruiting class in the SEC. And we look, they were just overall a really solid team last year. Points per game, 47 points per game, 510 yards per game, up in the top 10 nationally in both of those categories. And you have to look what they're returning. Of course, Tua is gone. Why only 55% of their offense is coming back, but Mac Jones is going to be there at quarterback. You're also returning Najee Harris. You're returning Devontae Smith. You're returning Jalen Waddle. Alabama is loaded. And then when you look on the defensive side, they only allowed around 18.5 points per game, only around 325 yards per game. And they're returning 60% of their defense, which isn't among the best in the SEC, but with the recruiting class they're going to bring in, they're going to be able to fill their holes in their defense really, really quickly. Alabama is one of the favorites to win the national title this year, and this is why the Crimson Tide are number 1 in the SEC. So that's going to do it for my 2020 SEC preseason power rankings. Quick heads up, tomorrow here on YouTube, I'm going to be live streaming a Memorial Day special for the Armed Forces. That's Navy, Army, and Air Force. I'm going to be going through their schedules and predicting their records. You don't want to miss it. Again, that's tomorrow around 7:30 or 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time right here on YouTube. I encourage you guys to go check it out. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Also consider subscribing if you're brand new to the channel or just enjoy my content. If you haven't done so already, please leave a comment down below. I love to hear your guys' thoughts. It means a lot when I have people comment on my stuff. And until next time, remember, play hard, but tailgate harder. I'll see you on the next video. Bye.